Is the old-fashioned cocktail out of fashion? Is it dying? Welcome back to Stab the Dragon Productions for episode number 251 and Introduction to Whiskey or Intro to Whiskey number 4, coming to you from Fort Worth, Texas on Tuesday, March 10th, 2026, where it is 80 degrees and thunderstorms are threatening. This Intro to Whiskey series is my journey of asking basic questions about whiskey and seeking answers. For 4 years, I've been documenting my sampling of different whiskeys and studying them, but I need to ask even more basic questions and expand that quest. Today, I'm going to look at one of the most famous and oldest popular cocktails made with bourbon or rye whiskeys and link it to a personal experience that I've had recently while traveling across the American Deep South for a family event. So today, we look at the old-fashioned cocktail. Here's one of my reference books right there. History. Now, I do plan on conducting a more thorough study of the old-fashioned cocktail in another episode, probably in June. But for now, we can say that the original name for this was simply the whiskey cocktail. And we think it began about 1806, thereabouts. It consisted of whiskey, sugar, bitters, and a dash of water. But cocktails multiplied and grew over the years, so that by about 1880 or so, this cocktail begins to be referenced in source materials as the old-fashioned cocktail. This is one of the most basic cornerstone cocktails of mixology. However, in recent decades, the last 50 years or so, it has receded in popularity. First, for the martini craze of the 1960s to the 80s, and then a brief resurgence, but now in the past few years, it has been superseded by the margarita and tequila. That's now the number one liquor in America and the number one cocktail in America. So is the old-fashioned out of fashion? My personal experience recently, while we were traveling across the southern states for a family gathering in Georgia, along the way there and back, I had 3 different old-fashioned cocktails at 3 different types of venues. And they were all 3 failures. First, we spent the night in Mississippi at a nice hotel that had a sports bar lounge. So we went in for a few drinks after we got settled in our room, and I asked about their old fashions. The bartender listed 6 or 7 bourbons that sounded decent, and so I could choose any of those. I chose a Woodford Reserve, and then an Angry Orchard for my wife. We got our drinks and sat down. Well, immediately, I knew this old-fashioned was off. It didn't seem right. It didn't have any bitters, didn't have any sweet. It tasted like watered down Woodford Reserve. Now, it did have an orange slice, not an orange peel. You can see my orange peel in there. And it had 3 bright red maraschino cherries, and it really just tasted like a Woodford Reserve highball, bourbon with ice water. I tasted nothing else. Now, the Angry Orchard my wife got was great. Coming home, we spent the night in Louisiana and ate at a reputable roadhouse-style restaurant with a good bar. I ordered an old-fashioned margarita for my wife. The old-fashioned had Elijah Craig. Showed up, and it was very light, just like the first one. It was very light in color, very watery looking. It had another orange slice and another bright red maraschino cherry. But when I sampled it, it had a nice blend of the bitters and simple syrup or some sweetener. But the bourbon, completely lost. Nowhere was Elijah Craig tasted in that cocktail. Oof. But the margarita, that was very good. Another fail for the old-fashioned, though. Getting home to Fort Worth the next day, we ate at our favorite barbecue place, very well respected. Have a complete bar. I ordered another old-fashioned, thinking 3rd time's a charm, surely in Texas. And this time I ordered it with TX bourbon, one of my favorites, and a Shiner Bock for my wife. The Shiner came in a big, beautiful round glass. The Old Fashioned, a plastic cup. That was my first clue. What's that floating in my drink? It was a slice of lemon, a lemon wedge. Never heard of a lemon in an Old Fashioned. Now, I have since researched, and that is, in fact, a thing, I guess. Normally, with me, I put lemons in a gin and tonic or scotch and soda, something like that. But this, when I tasted it, tasted like weak lemonade. Weak lemonade. I could not find the TX bourbon in there. There was no sweetener. There was no bitters. It was straight up lemon and water. That's what I got. Yeah, another fail. My third fail on this trip. Now, while my wife and I really do enjoy margaritas, that is my wife's drink of choice, I prefer the Old Fashioned and have in the last year or so started making them at home, like here. They are incredibly flexible. You can change up the whiskey, even the type of whiskey. You can use bourbon, you can use rye, you can use Canadian whiskeys, incredibly flexible. You can change up the sweetener. In this one that I've made today, I used turbinado cubes. Turbinado is raw sugar. In other words, and it's brown like brown sugar. But brown sugar, when you buy brown sugar, it's actually refined white sugar that's got molasses or something added back to it to make it brown. Turbinado, straight raw sugar. And so that's what I've got in here. Now, along with the different types of sweeteners, and actually a lot of time I use maple syrup. So you can use regular sugar, you can make a simple syrup, you can buy a simple syrup, you can do brown sugar, turbinado, a lot of varieties with the sweeteners. Similarly with the bitters. The standard bitters that I used here is Angostura, but I've also added black walnut bitters. And so you can change up the bitters and make your Old Fashioned to suit your taste and have something different every time. The whiskey that I used is a Texas grained glass whiskey. Right there. 1845 preemption. This comes from a little place northeast of Dallas, kind of out in the middle of the country, called Lowry's Crossing. Family-owned distillery, family-owned farm. So 100 proof. It's got a little bit of the Texas funk going on. And so that adds flavor. If you do a Kentucky whiskey, that makes one type of Old Fashioned. If you do a Texas whiskey, that's another type. If you do a Canadian whiskey, that's another type. So you can really change up these Old Fashions significantly. So my chief complaint, and hence this video, is that the only place I've had a really good Old Fashioned in the last 3 or 4 years is at the Acre Distillery here in Fort Worth, or in my house. Now, granted, I do not have a wide base of experience, but the restaurants I've gone to in the past few years simply don't know how to make Old Fashions. Everything now revolves around vodka and tequila, or maybe gin. Even my local American Legion bar, when I first went there a couple of years ago, I asked for an Old Fashioned. I was told, well, we aren't that kind of bar. Well, they made Bloody Marys that were pretty good. They made margaritas that were very good too. The only thing you could get with whiskey involved soft drinks, Crown and Crown, Jack and Coke, things like that. So my interpretation of all this, combined with the statistics that show a decline in whiskey drinking across the board, is that Old Fashions is out of fashion. It's dying. It's now generally a lost art form. So what is my action plan? Well, I'm going to continue making them at home, just like this. I share them with friends. My neighbor across the street had never had an old fashioned. He's kind of a margarita guy. He came over. I made him and his son-in-law an old fashioned. They loved it. My family, my cousin and I get together once in a while. We love making old fashions together. He's got a smoke kit. A friend of mine, David, gave me a smoke kit. And so we are now learning how to smoke our cocktails. And that adds a whole nother level to the old fashioned. In fact, that first bar that I was at in Mississippi last week, a lady came in after I had placed my order, and she ordered the same thing. She ordered an old-fashioned Woodford Reserve, but she asked the question, hey, can you smoke this? And the answer was no. So, but she and I talked just a little bit. She loves making old-fashions at the house and smoking them, as do I. So making them at home, sharing them with friends and family, that's a good thing. Enjoying Acre Distillery. If you live close to a craft whiskey distillery, I would say go there and enjoy their drinks. Their cocktails are amazing. And so when you go to a bar at a distillery, I can guarantee you their cocktail lineup is going to outdo just about any restaurant or bar in town. So out and about at restaurants, I might be done with the old fashioned in restaurants. Too many bad experiences. Now, what can I do to bring about a resurgence to bar staff education? I don't know. I have no idea. Maybe call and talk with the manager and say, hey, have you considered educating your bartenders on what an old fashioned is? So I don't know. Do you have any suggestions out there along these lines? But I'm just traumatized by the whole thing. Old fashions are dying. All right. So again, I've already talked about this, my old fashioned a little bit. Notice the color here. All right. That is an amber or a light brown, medium brown. Actually, that's a medium brown. Of the 3 old fashions I had this last week, none of them were even close to this color. None. And the only thing I got in here is the bourbon, 1 cherry. You can see the cherry there. Now notice that that's not a bright red cherry. My friend David gave me this bottle of Woodford Reserve bourbon cherries. And I've got a bottle of Luxardo cherries that are in bourbon, I guess, or brandy, something. So these are somewhat expensive compared with maraschino cherries. Maraschino cherries add nothing but color. These kind of bourbon cherries or Luxardo cherries, what they do is they do add flavor. All right, there's a whiskey element to those cherries, and so when you put those in here, it adds not so much color because those are dark red, purplish, black even, but it does add some flavor. I don't have a slice of an orange. I've got an orange peel. Now, in my research, I've seen that sometimes the people who slice an orange will muddle it, but in the 3 cocktails I had this last week, none of them were muddled, mashed. They were just slice of orange stuck in there or a slice of lemon. Who knew? Lemon. Apparently that's a thing. Some people like lemon in their old fashions. I do not. So, and then I've told you about the turbinado. Now the sugar cube is pretty hard. So I put that in first. And then I drizzled the Angostura bitters on top of the sugar cube as much as I could. And the walnut bitters. And then I poured in the bourbon, about 2 ounces of 1845 preemption bourbon, let it sit for just a little bit, and I took a fork actually and started stabbing the sugar cube and mixing it up in there. And with sugar cubes or even loose sugar, what's going to happen is you will see some sediment down at the bottom. And so as you drink, there will be some texture from the sugar, and the drink will get sweeter towards the bottom. If you use a simple syrup, or in my case, I really do like using maple syrup, then it mixes better, and there's not as much differentiation as you go down the glass. But a lot of people really want that differentiation. They want to see the grains of sugar in there. That's part of the experience. They want to feel that graininess as you drink it. That's part of the experience. So I get that. Now, with the bitters that I chose to use, I do prefer a slightly more bitter cocktail than sweet. I don't want to go too sweet. And so, this is balanced for me. I get a little bit of the sweetness and a little bit of the bitters. It leans more towards the bitters. One restaurant in my neighborhood that I went to, we've gone to that restaurant for 30 years or more. And their old-fashioned leaned heavily towards the bitter. And I really got no sweet. And so I felt that was out of balance. And then the cocktail I got in Louisiana was balanced between the sweet and the bitters, but I just got no bourbon in it. And then the one in Mississippi had just bourbon and water. And the one here in Fort Worth had lemon water. So, what you're looking for with an old-fashioned or any cocktail is a balance of the flavors. So, and then what adding the cherry, it's more than visual if you use the right cherries. It adds a little bit of flavor. And the orange peel, what you do with that orange peel is you wipe the rim of the glass on the inside and the outside with it, and it gets a little bit of an orange flavor, a little bit of citrus going on, and then you dump it in there and you continue to stir it. Then I use the one large ice cube approach. Sometimes I use the smaller ice cubes and put 3 in there. But the large ice cube approach, the ice melts more gradually. Now, it helps if you put your glass in the freezer for a little bit and get it cold. I failed to do that today, but I let it sit with the ice cube in there, and that's just fine. Now, this bourbon is 100 proof. My wife sampled the old-fashioned when she came in just a while ago, and she said that was way better than the 3 that we'd had in the past week. Now, the bourbon's a little bit too strong for her. Like she prefers 80 proofs, and I prefer the 100 proof. But otherwise, taste-wise, balance-wise, she said this was way better than what we'd been having. So you can tailor that to your individual tastes. All right, well, that does it for Stab the Dragon Productions today. And again, we will, in June, re-examine the old-fashioned, because the first 2 weeks of June is called Old-Fashioned Fortnight. It's a Kentucky thing, but we will re-examine the old-fashioned then. So this is Intro to Whiskey, number 4, out here.